All right. And we are recording. All right. So thanks everyone for coming in today. I'm Kylie from the Australian Computer Society in Queensland. I'm the membership manager and events manager. Before we start today, can I ask that you all mute your speakers and put your questions to Jenny in the chat area. Throughout the webinar today, Jenny will be asking questions from you throughout it. So please feel free to put your answers there, and please take the opportunity to respond to those questions. And also at the end of the webinar, there'll be there's some time dedicated to answer any questions that you may have to Jenny. So again, hi everybody, and thanks for joining our webinar series today. And thanks Jenny for joining us today. For today's episode, we welcome Jenny Krasny. Jenny has over 15 years of local and international consulting experience with some of the world's most respected mining, construction, engineering and manufacturing organisations, focusing on areas of strategy, development, culture change, safety culture, mentoring, executive coaching and leadership development. Jenny is currently a guest lecturer at Griffith University, where she discusses the role of an organisational psychologist in the context of autonomy, big data and AI. She is a certified master facilitator from the World's View Academy of Change and president of the Women's Initiative Network for Caterpillar Incorporated. Correct me if I'm wrong in this, Jenny. And so for today's webinar, titled Getting Real About Diversity in the IT Industry, Jenny will touch on inclusion in the workplace, and I encourage you after this webinar to challenge any situations where you see it isn't being implemented. Believe in yourself and push for it to be included wherever you go and wherever you work. Only by individuals calling it can changes be made on a whole. So I now hand over to Jenny. Thanks, Jenny. And over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm not being rude, but I will hide myself, so to speak, so I can read some notes, so you don't think I'm being rude when I'm not looking at the screen, but I will reveal myself when it comes to some Q&A at the end. So I'm not being rude, I'm still here. All right. So what I'd like to do before I get any further, though, is give you a little bit of an introduction to whom I am. Now, I'm just wanting to make sure these slides are working. Has everyone got the second slide? That looks like a girl looking frustrated at the screen. Yes, fantastic. Thank you. So I embarked on psychology simply to understand the question of why do people do what they do? I'm sure many of you have wondered that. How did they not see that? What were they thinking? All of that. And so that was genuinely what left me pondering as to why do they do what they do, and therefore I turned to psychology. And before any of you start to wonder whether somehow I'm going to get into your heads, I guarantee I'm not that type. I have little interest in what goes on in there, and more interested in understanding around the workplaces that people are exposed to. I've always had a soft spot for industry. Growing up, I spent a lot of time in the backyard with my father, who used to love disassembling and rebuilding cars. And so at one stage, my mother asked me, Jenny, what do you want to do when you grow up? And of course I said, I want to be a diesel mechanic. Now, I don't know if any of you hail from a European mother. I certainly do. And in my mum's eyes, a girl has long hair, pristine clothing and a clean job. So being a diesel mechanic never happened for me. I turned to psychology instead. However, the irony is, of course, that I now work for Caterpillar and I get to hang around with lots of big equipment and very dirty environments, and I love it. I absolutely love it. But the other reason I chose to stay in the world of psychology is something that I found quite distressing. It came from my father, who ultimately saw the workplace change. He'd gone from an environment where he was known by his name, and as time went on, he became known by his number. And should he be operating a vehicle or a piece of equipment, he became known as the number of that equipment. And so that led me to devote a lot of the work that I do into humanizing the workplace, ultimately of putting a face to a name, of removing labels and having leaders see their people for who they are rather than widgets who just get the job done. All right, so I'm going to pose you a question, and you should see it on your screen. I'd love to know, is diversity a priority for your organisation? I'll give you all a moment to type away. Got a couple of yeses coming through. Yeah, beautiful. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. You think it is? Well, I hope so. Unreal. Oh, yes, it appears to be a priority at times. I can relate to that one as well. So your answers don't surprise me. Some of them disappoint me that it's hit and miss, but not always. Yeah, absolutely. The reality is, if you ask any executive around the country is what their top priorities are, at some point within the first 3 or within the first 5, diversity is at the top of the list. Many of them ponder at the leadership table as to, well, how do we engage diversity? How do we bring diversity into the business? And certainly that's encouraging. I guess it's a step in the right direction. I remember when I started consulting into these so-called masculine industries, diversity really wasn't a topic of conversation. Now it's encouraging to know that it's a strategic goal, and organisations are trying to establish action groups and committees to make diversity a reality. And I know for some of you, and I see it too when I go from organisation to organisation, sometimes it's a diversity policy or a commitment to diversity and it stops as far as a pretty plaque on the wall. I appreciate that. Unfortunately, it's not a reality for people, despite the fact that the intention is there. Now, I'm preaching to the converted when I tell you, well, diversity makes good business sense. I mean, to be honest, it's becoming an expectation of employees past and present. Organisations today are required, or many at least, are required to show a business case as to, or show evidence of how they're supporting the diversity efforts of the industry, their organisation, especially since some large customers and even some of Caterpillar's customers are very much towing the line for diversity, and they're wanting all their business partners to show that they're on board with the journey as well. I mean, today, up and coming generations have higher expectations of our organisations as well. They go through university these days with cohorts that have a mixture of people, not just female and male, and certainly people from different countries, different cultural experiences, different ethnicities. So naturally, as people join organisations, they're looking to experience the community that they serve and the community from which they've come from. At least that's the expectation. And again, I'm preaching to the converted. This might be gender related to diversity, but it's not unusual to find that organisations who are accepting of all walks of life, irrespective of gender, instead looking for value and contribution, create an environment of engagement that results in increased productivity and profit. But we still have a little way to go. Men still outnumber females in the IT industry. Even different orientations, be it gender, be it sexual orientation, be it religious, ethnicity, affiliations, or whatever it may be, is still being outnumbered by the typical, by the traditional of what we find here in the country. We're finding that when it comes to pools of candidates, at least we're not short of diversity from different ethnicities and different cultures, but we still have pools of candidates applying for roles that are predominantly male. And if one of the interests is to increase the gender card in organisations, that's something to look at. Now, rather than simply looking at quotas and all of those sort of things, and I'm sure you've heard it before, but I think at some stage we need to really address girls at primary school, girls in preschool, because either at home or at school, IT, ICT is not being considered as an avenue to pursue. I typically find females who gravitate towards ICT or computing typically have a father, a brother, a family member that has some affiliation with computers, IT, engineering, and therefore only then does it become a reality for them. Having said all of that though, at least when it comes to the women's side of things, we're not doing too badly. I mean, of all the countries working in the world of technology, Australia is up there, a close second to Bulgaria, and with Romania following just behind. So it's not completely gloom or doom. Australia does really well, and the encouraging thing is there's a really nice foundation to build on. So back to you. What do you feel holds your diversity ambitions back? So for those of you who said yes, but not always, hit and miss sometimes, I'd be keen to hear from you as to, well, what do you feel holds this diversity thing back? It's a tricky one. Someone's responded beautifully. Well, leadership priorities, absolutely. So what holds diversity ambitions back? What I'm meaning by that question is, well, if all of our organisations that I speak with have ambitions to create some diversity in their workplace, and yet when we walk into workplaces, we're not really seeing it as much as we'd like to see. So what do you feel from your experience is holding those ambitions back from being a reality in the organisations? So hopefully I've explained that question a little better. Yeah, beautiful. So leadership priorities, holding people back, workplace culture, leadership appears again, cooperation, collaboration, and experiencing people as a human being rather than an it, which is very much up my alley. All right, well, I'm glad to hear that we're kind of in sync with each other. And so, as we've discussed, while organisations seem to be on this bandwagon of diversity, being different doesn't seem to always be welcome. Whether it's my customers now or past customers, I find that many have reported that despite their diversity efforts, the experience of acceptance of diversity is quite different. Many experience really high rates of discrimination attributable to diversity. I've had organisations or people say about their experiences in organisations that they've applied for a job and they've been told very clearly that, well, you won't get a job here with us because your English is not like ours. Now, this was feedback given by an American to an Australian. I've heard feedback from others say, well, don't even bother applying for that role. You're a female, you won't get it. So unfortunately, being different isn't always welcome despite the plaque on the wall. So it's still a concern, and we still have a long way to go in that world. But given that that's the reality I'm finding, and I've had people on the line that are finding similar experiences, it got me thinking in my whole orientation towards humanising the workplace. And what it got me thinking about is, perhaps has the horse come before the cart or the cart before the horse? So have we got it around the wrong way? And that is, so while there might be a need for diversity, perhaps the need is bigger to find a place at the table for people who are different, for people who bring diversity, for people who will bring a contribution that hasn't been had before. I mean, reality is sometimes it's difficult enough to build harmonious relationships with people who are a little bit like us, let alone diverse ones. So I have another question coming your way, and that is, what have your organisations that you've been exposed to, past or present, what are they doing to bolster inclusion? Because as I suggest, diversity is great, but finding room at the table for people to sit in and participate, that's inclusion. And I feel that's a part that many organisations are lacking. Any other thoughts from people in the room or on the line around what inclusion efforts have you or your organisation undertaken? Women as role models, nice. Of course, you can't be what you can't see. So sometimes to invite people to join the table, they need to feel secure that there's someone like them at the table. I love that. Celebrating multiculturalism and the unique differences people bring. Awesome, beautiful. It's a really good start. It's a really good start. All right, so building on your feedback, I'm loving this. So I guess the question I pose, and I'm not asking for an answer, it's more a question I pose to organisations who engage me and say, well, Jen, what would we do? What could we do to increase our diversity and our inclusion? And the first thing I pose is, how well are your leaders equipped? Because the reality is many organisations invest a lot of time and money into rolling out cultural awareness programs, if they have any at all. They roll out workplace bias programs. And while these things go a long way in shining a light on our blind spots, we must not forget that it's actually our leaders and managers who can make or break all of these intentions and all of these efforts. Managing people who are different to you can be challenging, not to mention the nuances that different religions or gender orientations, ethnicities and cultures bring to the table. Now, many of our managers have come through the ranks of managing things and managing processes, but managing people is different. We're actually a different kettle of fish. In some of my work, I do work related to fatigue management and encouraging organisations to create a culture where people can speak up and say, boss, I'm tired. I need to have a break. I need to have a nap. I'm just going to take a walk around the block. Unfortunately, as innocent as that conversation might sound, there's so much shame and there's so much stigma associated with actually speaking up, let alone the fact that tiredness or fatigue isn't just brought on by a lack of sleep. It's brought on by psychological stress or psychological injury. It's brought on about physiological and other conditions that might be happening in a person's environment. It might be brought on by the culture that the person's experiencing. And so when I say to people, well, fatigue management sounds easy, but are your managers equipped to respond to and handle and sit with the kind of responses they will get when someone actually opens up and says, well, actually, this is what's going on for me. Let's not forget our leaders. Absolutely, let's build up our workplace. Let's shed some spotlight on them as to how they could show up and see things from a different set of eyes. But let's not forget our managers, because I often say it really depends who your manager is on how you experience your world of work. The other thing I invite you to do to call out in your organisations, or even just take stock of yourself, is what is the language of your organisation? Now, when I say this, I'm often told that I'm playing with semantics. I mean, when I was growing up, we had this wonderful ad, a TV ad that was called Oils Ain't Oils. It was castrol oil that you put into your vehicle, and it was oils ain't oils, and I would argue that words ain't words. There's a nursery rhyme that some of you may have come across, which is sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. I cannot tell you how misleading that little phrase is. Words matter. And when words are used that do not resonate with the audience in question, regardless of their walk of life, they can be a real turn-off. As a consequence, if you're not already doing it, have a look at the language of your job ads. Have a look at the language and listen to the language that comes out of your mouth, words that are used in meetings, words that are used to and attached to KPIs, things and words that are celebrated. Words can change your brain for the good or for the not so good. Are your words inclusive or do they isolate? I also invite organisations to think about, well, what are your development and promotion practices? Because quite frankly, what works for one person doesn't work for another. Men, for example, might be stimulated by jobs that give them challenge, jobs that let them climb the hierarchy. Women may not be oriented that way. I don't want to put people into buckets because we're all very different, but words matter. and the opportunities and the way we promote people and the language we use around that absolutely matters. I often speak a lot about the power of the brain and the language we use. The brain is a wonderful tool, but at the end of the day, it is primarily responsible for keeping us alive. And there are words and there are actions and there are deeds that will trigger the brain to either go into flight mode and to fight mode. Actions and deeds that fall onto a particular criteria on the brain either stimulate the brain towards action or stimulate the brain towards running away. And there is a code which I will share with you. I don't have a slide about this. I thought about it as I was speaking. And what I say to you now is, consider for a moment that if what you do and how you promote and how you develop people, if it is dippy, D-I-P-I, to their brain, they will listen to you. Your brain will either be turned on or turned off if the message is dangerous. It will be turned on if it's important to them. It will be turned on if it's pleasurable to them. It will be turned on if what you're saying is interesting to them. You can hear that after everything I say, it is to them, not to you. What matters to you doesn't necessarily matter to them. And as somebody said in the chat just before, it's about creating inclusion. It's about creating and celebrating difference and mutual respect. The key to this whole diversity piece is seeing the person as a person and understanding what is it that drives that person, that gets them to wake up in the morning and come to work and show up as a complete person. The other piece to inclusion is, how does your culture embrace differences? The initiatives you run in your business say a lot about your commitment to difference and acceptance, as well as what you recognise and reward. At Caterpillar, we're a global business. We have at least 13 what we call employee groups, which are very much designed to create a space where people with difference can come together and share and be a support network for themselves. But these groups also work to foster environments where we call managers and business practices out and say, what's getting in the way of living an inclusive kind of culture? And these kind of initiatives, whether they're formalized in ERGs or whether there's people who are willing to stand up and be counted, is really important, because the rate of covering is staggering in conversations. Often the word covering is used with people who identify as LGBTI, but covering happens for all walks of life. And the staggering result is between 50 to 80% of people feel unsafe to fully show up at work. They will not share with people the name of their partner, whether it is a male or female or somewhere in between. They will not share with people that they have a child in fear that they will not get promoted or they'll be missed out on opportunities. They will not share that they're in a committed relationship in fear that they will not be given a job that allows them to travel and see the world. Unfortunately, so many people are hiding aspects of their true self. I mean, if you can't show up as your true self to work, how much of you are you not bringing and being the best that you can be? It is quite staggering. And while it might seem very obvious, to create a space of inclusion means to create a space where your facilities cater for difference. The number of times I will go to a facility, whether it's in a corporate environment or whether it's a manufacturing environment or a mining environment, the number of times I see women who might be expressing to feed their child at home who have to run to the public toilet or have to run to their car in order to express, because the facility does not have even a safety room or a well-being room or a sick bay. They don't have a space where they can safely express. Individuals who might want to pray do not have a prayer room, so they're finding themselves having to hide between cars in order to pray. The number of times I've seen individuals, male or female or somewhere in between is irrespective, having to get into their vehicle and if possible drive down to the local McDonald's restaurant to use a clean toilet because the toilets at the facility don't have a working door. And they might want to conceal themselves, which would be the most humane thing to do. And so while it sounds very obvious, it is still staggering the amount of organisations I come across that do not cater for the needs of the people that work for them and make their companies successful. At the end of the day, we all want to fit in. I often say to people, we don't grow up very much. We want to fit in as children. We never want to be the last child picked to be on a sports team or in class. And regardless of industry, this carries through us to us as we grow up. We're really just older, bigger, fatter, maybe uglier children. We still have a need to connect. Human beings are social creatures. Whether we want lots of people around us or only one around us, we are social creatures. Relationships matter. Relationships keep the world turning. And this can happen in our clean office environments as well. Our people and ourselves, we want to fit in, but we want to fit in as us. We want to be seen as the unique person we are without us having to be someone we're not. And over to you. I will now unhide myself. Here we go.
All right. Thanks, Jenny. That was awesome. Lots of
Thank you.
really motivated me actually to dig deep and look for areas where the organisation can improve and where we can try to make a difference as well. Please forward your questions through, and we'll take them on as they come in.
I'm getting some awesome compliments. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. If you have any questions afterwards and you'd like Jenny to maybe go to your organisation or whatever, please reach out and we'll set that in train. Okay, it doesn't look like there's so many questions coming in.
I do have a slide deck that I've shared with Kylie, so if you're interested, I'm more than happy, Kylie, if you want to circulate that to attendees. My email address is on the last slide. That looks like so. So I'm very happy for anyone, if you'd like me to be a sounding board for you, if you'd like me to visit you in your organisation, if you're in Brisbane, that's kind of convenient. I'm happy to shout you a coffee and we can certainly talk about what does that mean to you, and simply as a sounding board, as someone who gets to see lots of things and sees good things and not so good things.
Wonderful. I just see a comment from Jenny, from Sharon, that says we need this more, and it's true. And we will be rolling out a few more diversity or inclusion events, I guess, throughout the year. So expanding on what Jenny said, and then I guess we just need to work out a way through that. So they will be coming. And okay, here's a question. What do you do when the board or leaders do not think diversity is important in an organisation?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. Sometimes I often find that it's the swell of the people beneath them that show the business case of why diversity is important is what matters. I've worked with a number of organisations where the leaders are blind or the board is blind to the need for diversity, for the need for inclusion. And I've had a swell of interest from the workforce who have ultimately built up a business case. I've helped them write it, and they have presented it with some help with some presentation skills help from me, have presented it to the leadership table. And it's had leaders at least open their eyes and think a little bit differently about it. Sometimes it involves finding a customer or a key partner that business works with that has a passion about diversity and inclusion, who's done some wonderful things to story share. I often find many organisations need to sometimes step into someone else's backyard in order to see what their backyard holds. To be honest, Caterpillar for a long time is a proud business, and for a long time Caterpillar thought, well, everything we need to know is within our four walls and within our people, and we can become very blindsided. So certainly one of the things that happened almost a decade ago now, Caterpillar opened their doors and they run hackathons, because not everyone who knows how to create wonderful script and programs and all of that live within our four walls. We've got up and coming generations who can do wonderful things. Many Caterpillar and people are now creating partnerships with businesses and other suppliers and spending time in their four walls to understand what are they doing that they could bring into their organisation. So sometimes it requires a rude shock from a colleague and a peer from another organisation. And as I said, many organisations have had a swell of interest from the bottom up, where the bottom up has presented some data to say, this is what it's costing us now. This is what it could be costing us if we just did something different.
Thank you. There's another question here from Vaishnavi. Apologies if that's not pronounced properly, but I think that you just touched on what that question asks. As employees, what efforts or steps can we take to make the environment more inclusive? And you just talked about going from the bottom up with, so it's maybe expand on that a little bit more again.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom up is one in terms of getting in touch with the leaders, but it feels like when I come to organisations and I am asked this question, sometimes I feel like I'm inviting people to learn how to be people again, and that is to see people as people and simply say hello. It is mind-blowing to me that I can walk into different organisations and the number of people who are so busy looking at the floor and inspecting the colour of their shoes, rather than seeing what's in their surroundings, blows my mind. If people only looked up, said hello, who are you, that would make a big difference. I know it sounds simple, and people say to me, Jenny, if only we had a technology or something that allowed us to connect to people real time and have empathy. And I look at them and say, you've always had it, and that's called 2 ears and a mouth, and time is making the time to reach out and get to know your fellow colleagues. It might sound very simple, but it doesn't mean it's easy, right?
That's true. And I also think, Jenny, that in today's world, how it's changed so much where, the price of a house, etc., requires both parents to work, and as a result, there's extra stresses. And when you're talking about diversity and inclusion, it has to take in so much more than just gender and religion and race. It's all about geography as well, AI, how that comes into play, ageism, and why it baffles me why not many organisations support job sharing in a world where it would solve a lot of problems. So there's all these things that I think need still a little bit of work. And just to understand what you said as well, everyone's a human, and to try to understand that environment and have an inclusion policy whereby we appreciate who you are as people and what your life brings and what you are doing in your life. Let's try to make this work and build a team where it works for both sides. I did say ageism.
We're in an interesting scenario and world now. It's funny, I did my master's research about 15 years ago, and I happened upon a book. It was one of those funky books where the cover was material-based and it was falling apart, and the pages smelt very mothball-like. It was beautiful. And I opened a page up, and it said the biggest challenges facing organisations today is communication. Fast forward to 2019, I don't think we've changed that much. The only thing that's different is now we have a little device that sits in our pockets. And in many respects, we are more connected than ever. And in some respects, we couldn't be more lonelier. We are so busy trying to juggle so many balls. We're so busy focusing on what's next that we don't have the here and now time. We don't create the time for us to check in with ourselves and check in with our fellow man. And you're right, we do work in virtual teams, we work in global teams, and behind our skin colour, behind our orientation, behind our age, is still a human being who still wants to be appreciated for who they really are. And if people could only see past all of that and connect to people as people and respect that, sometimes to work in our virtual and global world, there's swings and roundabouts. I work in a global environment. The bulk of my team are in the US. So the number of times I'm up at stupid o'clock in order to connect to their sensible time meetings is ridiculous. It was only until I called it out and I said, look, I might be a minority of one, but I'd love it if we could alternate our meeting time. So I don't mind getting up at midnight once in a while, but I'd love it if you could stay back at work till 6 maybe and connect with me for a 1 hour meeting. How's that? So it does involve someone also taking the initiative and speaking up.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And as Richard Branson once said, your bottom line isn't the currency or for your organisation, it's your people. And I have to agree with that, because if you have a really happy, content, motivated workplace, because you are appreciated as a person, you're going to give 110% in your role because they see you. So, yeah. And see what
He
you're doing.
also said, yeah, I know he didn't say this. Richard Branson often says, you know, look at your own people and your customers will be sorted out. I also like that school of thought is think about how we serve our customers. We will bend over backwards in order to serve our customers. If we only brought that mentality back into the workplace, it would make a real big difference. To see each other as customers, it would go a long way.
Right. We have a question in Q&A actually. It says, I have a question. In my company, the CEO said once, there are too many Chinese in our company. How to deal with this?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, wow.
Well, and I wonder, I mean, it might sound silly coming from me given that the language was used, but I wonder if he realised what he said. The number of times that I act as a mirror in organisations where I say to somebody, okay, this is what I heard you say. And I say it back to them and I say, so if you were in the audience and if you heard that, what would that do? I spend a lot of time throwing a mirror back at leaders and paraphrasing and reflecting and getting them to think about, gee, if I heard those words and I was of that ilk, be it female, masculine, Chinese, Norwegian, I don't know, I'm making it up now. But if I was of that targeted audience, how would I feel? Building empathy is something that we need to do for our leaders. And I would throw it back in that leader's face and say, did you realise that when you said this is what it actually meant to us? Why would we want to turn up to work if we feel that we're not wanted?
That's right. There's another question here. I think you can see, Jenny. Where can we go to learn about the language we should be avoiding?
So many places. There's an awesome book. It's a good starting place. I mean, there are so many places, and I can certainly chat to some of you if you want to email me as well. But there's a really cool book called Words Can Change Your Brain. That's a really cool book around the language that we use that can help or hinder our development and help or hinder our audiences that we want to target. So Words Can Change Your Brain. Really cool little read. You can find it in the Brisbane Library or a good library as well. You can simply jump onto Google. Dr. Google has a lot of responses as well around language suitable for gender neutral language in job ads or culturally neutral language in job applications and so forth. Lots of wonderful stuff online to start with. But yeah, Words Can Change Your Brain. I don't know the author, Sharon. I'm sorry, I can't remember it at the moment. I will make sure that I talk to Kylie and we'll certainly get back to you on that. Yeah. I love your comment too around the fact that us women like to say sorry a lot. Honestly, become aware of that, and every time you want to say it, take a breath. It's something we do. It's interesting when I traveled to Russia to do a technology installation and support the change management process, I had someone pull me up and they said to me, Jenny, why you say sorry? Why you say sorry? You just bumped me. It's not a problem. Don't say sorry. Only say sorry to something that you do and it's a mistake that's created an upset for everyone. Then maybe say sorry. But if you've simply bumped into someone or you've asked them if it's okay if you bring something up, don't say sorry. Yeah. It's funny. We do it a lot.
It's true.
Yeah.
So I just want to touch on AI now, Jenny, with the development of AI, with just the basic recruitment process, and how to make sure that's inclusive in the wording, etc., like that, and in the algorithms in the back end. How do you see that impacting? Is it on a large scale at the moment, or are we doing all right in developing?
It's still a work in progress, to be honest. I mean, I have a lot of relationships with recruitment selection psychometric providers that are working really hard to create culturally neutral and gender neutral assessments and technology that scans resumes and goes in search of big data to capture information about individuals. Finding things that are culturally neutral and gender neutral is still a work in progress. We've got a long way to go in that regard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, at least we're on the path, I guess. It will happen eventually. I just hope.
Yeah. Of course, the interesting thing we have is there are many males, and I'm not singling out the males. This is not an us and them conversation. But given we have such a predominance of males in the IT technology, in the R&D space, the bizarre thing is we now have Caucasian males trying to create gender neutral and culturally neutral assessments and technology. It's an interesting paradox. Yeah.
So are they putting teams together that have more, in creating those algorithms, are they starting to put teams together that are more balanced to make sure those are all...
Some are genuinely trying, and many are looking outside the box to say, what other disciplines can we engage in that have some experience in this that we can bring into the process? So they're certainly talking to expert panels and subject matter experts, but it's still not it's still a question I have to poke and invite them to think about, because it's easy. If you've got a bunch of people at the table and you think you're capable, then you're more likely to go to what's easy versus what's hard, and invite people to a table that who knows what they're going to say when they're open their mouth. So they're certainly trying, but the number of times I have to poke and remind is still interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any more questions that we need to that you'd like to ask? All right, well, we might leave it there. Thank you so much, Jenny, for your time today. And thanks everyone for coming in. If you have any questions that comes up, please feel free to send them through and I'll flick them through to Jenny, or email you, Jenny, if you're okay with that, or what would you...
Yeah, not a problem.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
I'll end the session now, and yeah, thanks again.